Hey everybody, it is Saturday, July 27th. And I realize it probably doesn't make sense to announce the date and time all the time because I know you guys are all watching these at different times. But anyways, I'm old school. Um, and the other thing, just as a weird quick aside, so for those of you who have never made a live video on YouTube, it always asks, "Is this made for kids?" And it always makes me like I always answer it wrong because I'm just like, yeah, of course kids can watch this. But really, what they're asking is this made specifically for kids because then they gotta you know make sure there's nothing bad in it. Um, anyways, YouTube, you need to change that. Okay, moving on. Hello, everybody. Hope everybody's doing well. So, on today's video or live session or whatever, if you're out there, drop by and say hi. Um, I was watching another video from our friends over at Typebook on, and I linked it below. And it's on sort of the differences between Enfj and Infj, which are pretty profound, um, and why they might an Enfj might think they're an Infj or vice versa. So I'd recommend watching it, and maybe even watching it before watching this, because A, I don't want to steal their thunder, and B, I'm just sort of riff off of some of the points they raised, which I thought were interesting and good points as always. So one of the first things they are talking about is how it so I don't know if it's a lot of people or just some people, but there's sort of a general idea out there that if you have all the same functions, the first four functions, that it's easy to sort of think that like an INFJ and an ENFJ, which have the same functions but in a different order, that they're somehow similar or it can be grouped together. And you sort of hear the alpha quadrants and beta quadrants and all that. um, but they make the point that that's sort of misleading or not entirely true because ENFJs and INFJs are very different. Very different types, even though it's just one letter off and they have the same functions, but just in a different order. They sort of cite to the fact that an ENFJ is a lead feeler, and in sort of the traditional Jungian sense, they would just be considered a feeling type, extroverted feeling type, where an INFJ is a lead intuitive, um, introverted intuition, and in the traditional Jungian sense, they'd be considered an intuitive type or introverted intuition. And those are very, very different types. And they go into sort of the key differences. But one thing, and I'm going to do the like INFJ or lead intuitive thing and just sort of like give my own theory of what I think is going on here. But it raises, I think, sort of an interesting phenomenon and something to sort of keep in mind as you're sort of on your typing journey out there. And that's the difference between what your lead function is doing and what your second function is doing. What about INFJ and predictions? Not sure what the question is, but I'll get back to it, Yuki. Maybe let me know specifically what you're asking. Sorry, somebody's commenting here. So backing up, the sort of the differences between what your lead function is doing and what your second function is doing, or your dominant function versus what we typically call the tool function. And it leads to a very different sort of personality type, even in the ENFJ and INFJ, because even though they're the same two functions, they're doing different things, and it sort of shows itself or manifests itself in the overall personality. And and this is true, I think, for a lot of the other types where, I think it's harder to differentiate an ESFP and an ESTP who both have lead extroverted sensing than an ESTP from an ISTP. Because the lead extroverted sensing types, there's just something about them, and then it's just sort of a difference of what's the difference between their tool function. But, an ESTP and ISTP are very different. And you can just sort of go across the board, right? I mean, your ESTJs and ENTJs, both lead extroverted thinking, are going to be very similar to each other in lots of ways, and more so than maybe an ENTJ and an INTJ would be. So on down the board, right? So what's going on there? Sorry, 1 sec. Like doing predictions in team. Yeah. Somebody's asking you a question in the comments. Let me get back to you, just to sort of keep the flow going, or the main thing I'm talking about. But I will get back to that question. Okay. So lead function versus tool function. Sorry. I got to remind myself where I am. So the way I like to think about it is your dominant function is your ultimate goal. It's the ultimate end. And the tool function is going to be your means to that end, or what do you use to achieve whatever goal it is. And you might have seen some of my videos where I talk about what sort of the ultimate goal or ultimate end of the Infj is. And frankly, I think it's just to know things. Why? I don't know. But I mean, maybe there's some sort of collective test that the aliens are going to come down and give everybody, and the INFJs and the INTJs will score really well on it. I don't know. But for some reason, through biological evolution or whatever, we've designed a type, or nature has designed a type of the INFJ, and I would lump the INTJ in there, of these lead introverted intuitives or intuition users, where really, I mean, again, like the goal is just to know abstract things in the metaphysical sort of realm or universe, and to be able to sort of translate, I guess, that information that we've acquired and sort of assembled together using our NI, and somehow manifest it out into the real world. And so traditionally this would be sort of the people who sort of keep the fabric of society sort of tied together, and running along. And so I usually think of, and I've used this example before, sort of the Brehons in Ireland, which were kind of like druids, but not really. But they were like the judges, and the law keepers of Ireland, and they didn't have a writing system or anything, so all of their rules and their laws in ancient Ireland were just passed down through oral tradition. And so they sort of gather a group of individuals when they were really young, and these people would just sort of grow up and they'd learn the law, but they would learn it through poetics and through storytelling. And so they had to sort of learn sort of the real language arts, like poetry and rhetoric and logic, and all of that. And they sort of carried the tradition of their culture's law from generation to generation, right? And I would probably argue, if I went back in time and gave everybody an MBTI test, sort of the lead Brahins were probably INFJs or maybe some INTJs. And because they're able to sort of tap in to that introverted intuition and hold on to that information or that knowledge that you're building through your NI, and make all those sort of associations and everything that you need to do to sort of keep the fabric of society together. And I also sort of think of like the clergy once the Catholic Church came around and stuff, people who just like to sit around and think and, ponder on sort of these abstract ideas. But with the INFJ, it's about society and people. And the INTJs, it's more about objects and, less about people. But, they're both lead intuitives and they can probably both do basically the same thing when it comes to that kind of stuff. So, but that's very different. Oh, let me back up. So it's that lead NI, which is sort of the goal. That's the end state, is just to acquire this body of knowledge, and eventually you're going to apply it. Whether it be through the legal system or coming up with laws or coming up with traditions or whatever rituals, that kind of stuff. But at the core of it, the individuals, the INFJs, are trying to just acquire the knowledge. And so if you're an INFJ, real INFJ out there, that's why you get all giddy when you walk into a big library or a big bookstore, because there's all this information. And your brain gets all excited because of all the potential information that you could soak up while you're in there. So that's the lead function. The second function is the tool function that is sort of your ends to achieve your goal. So it's what you're using to feed in to your NI. So INFJs are using their FE for the purpose of building their NI, right? So we like to interact with people who are interesting. We like to listen to people who are interesting. Like whether it just be watching lectures on YouTube or I went to undergrad, grad school, and law school. Why? I don't know, but maybe because I liked listening to interesting people like talk about their ideas. And not only just sort of listening in a passive way, but really interacting with them and getting to know them. And INFJs will tell you, like, we're usually pretty personable. We usually like to talk to people, but if you're not interesting and we don't think we're going to learn anything from you, we can be pretty aloof, right? Like we can pretty much just write you off because we spend our energy, our FE energy, trying to interact with people and engage with people to get knowledge out of them and to get interesting information out of them. And that's why we're very good listeners. It's why people come to us with their problems, because we want to help them. Not so much. It's because we're very good at listening and then just sort of, giving them sort of maybe a theory or a different perspective of a way of thinking about it. So, but it isn't like the ENFJ, which I'll get into in a second, where they are actually seeking out to help people, because that's their end goal. So the INFJ, we're using that FE not because we want to go around and like our end goal isn't the engagement with people like it is with an ENFJ or an ESFJ who both have lead FE. Our end goal is to get information. And so the more interesting people we can be around and the more interesting people we can meet, the sort of the better we feel, or the more accomplished we feel. And so, in my experience, I have a lot of different friends from a lot of different backgrounds. I grew up in a college town, so that also helped. But I think it would be like that anyways. I different socioeconomic classes, different interests, it's all over the board. Like I can't stand being surrounded by the same type of people. It drives me nuts. And it's not to say that there's anything wrong with one type or another. It's just that I need sort of, for lack of a better term, diversity, because I don't feel like I'm learning anything or experiencing anything if I'm just around the same type of people all the time. And I would imagine a lot of INFJs are like this. And it's probably another reason that INFJs are so into personality types and Jungian psychology and all that. Because, sorry, there was something going on outside. Anyways, it allows us to sort of sharpen those NI blades and, acquire the information that we're looking for. Okay, so enough about that. Using FE to build up the NI. The second function, your tool function, is what is your means, and your first function is your end, the means to the end. So let's compare that to the Enfj and why they're so different than an INFJ. So ENFJs, to me, just a big holistic picture. They're like, they always remind me of like the mother ducks just running around and getting their baby ducks in line, and just sort of prodding people along, like, you got to do this, you got to do this. I sort of describe it as being in everybody's business. ESFJs, ENFJs are just sort of like that. They like to guide, because it's that extroverted feeling. And they like to engage with people. But if they're going to engage with people, they want some sort of reason for doing it or some sort of goal for doing it. And a lot of it is just that mother duck kind of thing, like just prodding. And we're all the baby ducks, to the ENFJ. They like to prod us, and and it could be motivating us and telling us be all that you can be, that kind of stuff. ENFJs are very good at that. But that's their goal. Their FE is their goal. Okay. And then they use their NI as their tool function, and that's their means to their goal. So they come up with all the theories and stuff like that using their NI, but they're using it for a different reason. They're not using it just because they want, that is the goal itself, is to acquire as much knowledge. They're going to use it in a much more applied way, probably a much more practical way, where they're going to use their NI to acquire, to build those associations and those patterns in the metaphysical world, to the extent that it helps them accomplish whatever they're trying to accomplish through their FE. To the extent it helps them prod the little baby ducks and get them into line. But they're not really going to waste their time, focusing on things that don't help that goal, as opposed to the INFJ, where you could walk in an INFJ into a bookstore and they'll come out with 3 different books that are all on totally different things, right? Like one might be on psychology, another one's on like the history of the Tudors in England, and then another one's on like, cell biology or something. And somebody, asks, oh, what do you need all those for? But you're just like, trust me, they'll come in handy. At some point, all this stuff is going to come in handy when the aliens come down and give us the test. But to us, it makes perfect sense. An ENFJ, I don't really think you're going to get that, unless there's like some specific goal where they need that all 3 types of information to prod their little baby ducks and build their empires. ENFJs and ESFJs, again, I think of them as sort of empire building, or cult. Like they really are the cult leaders. They like to guide people, and and take it to an extreme. You get a really good ENFJ, you got a really good cult leader, right? Because they can prod those people into crazy situations. Okay. So, but that's not to, all my ENFJ buddies out there, it's not to say you're all cult leaders. I know you're not, but you do like to prod people, and you do like to sort of direct people into their life's goal or, direction. Okay. So, back to Typebook, so they're talking about the difference between the ENFJ and the INFJ. And I think that, and it really does boil down to one's an extroverted feeler type and one's an introverted intuition type. And, and all the things that come with that, right? I mean, the INFJ is going to be more reserved. They're going to process information instead of acting on it. We're going to be more observers than we are actors. And to the extent that we do act, it's to help our observations, right? So we're just trying to accumulate as much observational NI type of information as we can, as opposed to the ENFJ, where they're out there acting in the world. And to the extent they use any sort of observation function like NI and trying to build up a theory or something like that, they're just using it to serve that FE. Okay, so hopefully that makes the point, and you can think about that just all the way through all the different types. ENTJ, INTJ, same sort of thing. ENTJ, they're out there using their extroverted thinking, trying to build their empire. They're trying to control that environment. They're not really prodding the baby ducks along, but they're building their big, complicated war machine or system or business, whatever they're working on. And they're going to use their introverted intuition to serve that function. I'm going to acquire as much NI type of knowledge, metaphysical knowledge, to help me build my empire. Compare that to the INTJ, where they're more like the INFJ, where really their end goal is to just have the knowledge, to just acquire the knowledge, to be sort of the harbinger, is that the right word? The store of the knowledge. And then they're going to use their TE to sort of figure out, okay, how can I acquire it, in the same way that the INFJ is using their FE to sort of interact with people and learn from people. The INTJ is probably going to learn more from sort of object kind of experience, like tinkering with things, working with computers, that kind of stuff. And sort of maybe not so much social, like learning from other people and learning from experiences with people, but or interactions with people, but more of like interactions with things, I guess. INTJs out there, you can let me know your thoughts on that. Okay, so the other thing that they went on, and I didn't really realize that this was an issue out there, but but apparently there's this epidemic of ENFJs out there on YouTube, apparently, who fancy themselves as INFJs. They think they're INFJs when they're really ENFJs. And I did, and so I sort of like looked at some channels, because I gotta admit, I don't really watch a whole lot of different channels. There's probably like a handful of these, personality type channels that I watch. So I went around and I was like, oh my God, there is so many ENFJs out there that have these sort of INFJ channels. And to me, I mean, I think it really boils down to, and I'm not going to call anybody out by name, whatever. Maybe I'm wrong. I'll fully admit that. But to me, it boils down to, if there's a lot of channels that seem to be like these sort of spiritual guru, self-help, like mama duck prodding her baby ducks into the right path, into the right direction. And that is a very ENFJ. So to the extent somebody is out there and it sort of feels like it's like sort of this, like they're trying to sort of a self-help, spiritual journey kind of guidance, spiritual growth gurus. That's a very ENFJ thing, right? And it's okay to be an ENFJ. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's not INFJ, right? And so to the extent they try to say, well, I think this and I think that, and it's because of my INFJ-ness. No, it's because of your ENFJ-ness. And it's fine because they'll go through the functions and they'll be like, this function makes me think this kind of way, and they have the same function, so they're not wrong. It's just that on a total grand scale, they're just extroverted feelers. They're the mama ducks trying to prod their little baby ducks, and they're and so and my impression is a lot of them are at that age where they're starting to develop their NI, and so the NI is sort of taking over, I think, in a way that it hadn't before, but as a second function, and a lot of the things that they talk about is how they're using their NI to guide their path or to help other people. That is using NI as a tool function. That is not using NI as a lead function. And you can compare that to the people who, again, this is my personal opinion, that are really the INFJs out there. Rose on Typebook, Joyce, I always forget her channel, but she's all over the place and she's really good. And she does MBTI videos. And I really think she's an INFJ. I'm pretty sure she says she is. And she also has another INFJ on there a lot as a guest. She's also really good. But they always talk about the idea. They don't focus on trying to, they're not trying to play mama duck prodding their baby ducks, right? They like to talk about the idea of personality types or the idea of whatever it is they're talking about, of introverted intuition, and and sort of get to the heart of it. And they can't stop using metaphors. They can't stop using analogies. It's like this. It's like this. It's like being in a pool and you're surrounded by everything going on. And when you get out of the pool, then you're observing. Very like just and analogies and building up knowledge through analogy or analog or however you want to think about it. And so what was I saying? And that's but they're not focusing on like trying to direct people or trying to serve as like a spiritual guru. To the extent they're giving any sort of advice or anything, it's just to sort of impart their knowledge or what they know about, whatever topic it is they're thinking about. But they, the INFJs, we don't really care what you do with it. Like we just want to get it out there and tell you. We're not trying to convince anybody of doing anything. We're not trying to prod you into any particular direction. We're just like, yeah, here's what I think. And when you listen to like Typebook, which has got two lead introverted intuitives, an INTJ and an INFJ, it's just constant, just like analogies back and forth and just talking about the idea, and none of this like people should be doing this and people should be doing that and people would feel a lot better if they did this or that. And to the extent they do, it's only like they should be thinking about it this way, right? It's about the idea, not about what they really should be doing with their lives or their life direction or anything like that. Where the ENFJ channels that I see are much more about, taking questions from people and giving that sort of Dear Abby kind of advice, right? Here's what's going on and here's how to think about it and here's how to apply whatever it is into your life and make your life better. Great. You got no problem with it, but it's not INFJ. INFJs, we're observers. We don't care. Like we're not trying to interact with the world in that way. We're not trying to control it or direct it. We just want to observe it. Because when the aliens come down and give us the test, we want to get a perfect score. Okay. I think, what else was I going to say? Oh, ENFJ. The other thing that I noticed watching these shows that I think that are ENFJ, again, I could be wrong, they tend to talk about themselves in their journey a lot more. Like, INFJs, we don't talk about ourselves. And the only extent that we talk about ourselves is to use it as an analogy or as an example to get whatever idea it is we're talking about, to get it across, right? Like, oh yeah, there was that one time that I did this, and that sort of reminded me of this situation, and here's the observation or the information that I got out of that experience, or what the theory that I came up with. As opposed to, we don't talk about how 5 years ago I was really down and depressed, and then I came across the Young book and it changed my life, and now I'm going to impart that knowledge to you to change your life. That's extroverted feeling stuff. That's using introverted intuition as a tool function to help your dominant function serve its goal, right? And if your dominant function is to help people, great, I love it, but it's not INFJ. And you also hear about INFJs being like the counselors, and I think that's the Kiersey term, and how we're supposed to be good psychologists and stuff. We really just have you fooled. We just like to listen because we're trying to get information. And we will give you our little theories and our little perspective. And yeah, we care to the extent that any human cares about another human, except for the INTJs. But that isn't our goal. Our goal isn't to go out there and try to change the world and be some sort of spiritual growth guru and be the mama duck out there. Our goal is to be a nice person, just like everybody else is, to the extent everybody else is. But really, like, we just like interacting with people, because we like the knowledge that we get out of it. And if we can give people a little bit of advice and little tips here and there, or like, here's how I think about it, yeah, it makes us feel good, just like it would anybody else. Makes us feel like that knowledge, all that stuff that we're building up in our NI is serving some sort of useful purpose. That's great, but it's not really our goal. And so if you're an INFJ out there, and you really are an INFJ, and you're sort of thinking, well, I want to go into counseling stuff, think about it, whether or not that's really what you want to do. ENFJs, totally. ENFJs, they want to, be the self-help gurus. All right. I think I've beaten that point to death. So thank you again to Typebook for the video. I thought it was real interesting, and I'd recommend everybody watch that if you haven't already. And you got some comments down here. So let's see what people are saying down here. Sorry, there's this weird like heart thing in covering the text. I find being nice is not a common trait amongst humans. Yeah, well, that's why I said to the extent that humans are. I do agree that, a lot of altruistic behavior is really self-interested, but I do, but there is an extent to which, people are being nice to each other and trying to help. I'm not that cynical. I'm still a feeler at heart. Okay, let's see here. What about INFJ and predictions? Like doing predictions in MBTI tests, it is one of the questions asked, like predicting the future. Yeah, I mean, lead introverted intuition users are going to be good at predictions because we're good at seeing patterns, right? And so to the extent that there's consistency in the world, then we're going to recognize the pattern. And if the pattern is constantly A, B, D, A, B, D, and then somebody gives you A, B, you're going to be able to figure out that most likely D is going to follow, right? And that's just pattern recognition, and that's a large part of what NI is doing, is this pattern recognition and building up associations and knowledge through that. But it also might be a little bit domain specific. So it might be, we're better at sort of predicting metaphysical stuff as opposed to actual physical stuff. But INFJs are definitely going to be good at predicting how humans are going to react. Like, to the extent we have a quote unquote superpower, that is our superpower. We know how people are going to react to what is being said or a given situation in a way that a lot of other people don't. And I sort of find myself in this situation all the time, just in the real world, working world, where somebody wants to go with plan A, where there's a plan B available. And I'm just like, well, look, if we do plan A, this is what the client or the other side or whoever you're dealing with is going to think about it. If we do plan B, they'll think about it this other way. I say we go with plan B because I'd much rather have them react to plan B than react to plan A. Hopefully that makes sense. And I'll say things like that, and then I'll just sort of get these blank stares, like, well, how do you know they're going to do it? Like, why would you, just trust me. I'm an INFJ, just trust me. So we do that a lot without even really knowing it. And, how people are going to react, so it can lead to things like, being conflict avoidant, things like that, because we know that whatever, saying such and such is going to cause conflict. So we might be a little bit more reserved than, other types out there. But as far as making predictions, yeah, that kind of stuff, we make good predictions, but maybe not other things, like recognizing patterns and sort of computer code or other sort of physical type electronics or something. Like, that's all gobbledygook to me. But I do know people. I do know how people are going to react. But if you open up a circuit board on a computer, I can't, like, no matter how long or how much time you give me to review it, I'm not going to know what the pattern is there in the way that an INTJ would. And that, if you take out one chip or processor and put in another circuit or something, like, I have no idea how that, like, what's going to happen there. Okay. What do you think about the wounded INFP masking as an INFJ? I'm not familiar with the concept, but I can imagine it's out there. I keep hearing the theory that INFPs overemphasizing FE to give a perception that they are an INFJ. Well, okay, so an INFP, I mean, they're going to have fifth function FE, which they're going to use selectively. Like, they're going to use it when they need it. In the same way that I am a lead introverted intuitive, but what I'm doing right now is using my NE to come up with explanations and a way to get my NI stuff out into the world, so that everybody knows what I'm talking about or what I'm thinking. And so the analogy here is somebody could come across and be like, wow, I watch his videos and all he's doing is NE. Well, yeah, because that's the only way I can get the information out to you is to use NE. But it's why I, have to say, and stumble around and sort of pause and misdirect. And I sort of talk around the subject as opposed to directly addressing it, because NE doesn't really come comfortably to me and I have to sort of get it out. And as opposed to if you watch somebody who really is lead extroverted intuition, like they just talk very smoothly, very fluidly, and they don't have the whole going on side tangents and everything like that we and I's do. So with the INFP, I mean, yeah, I mean they're going to use their FE, and again, I mean we got to make sure we're thinking about what FE is in the same way. Like, I mean, they are going to try to engage with people and all that, but in the end, when you talk to an INFP, if they're really an INFP, no matter what they, no matter how hard they try to FE the situation. So, in other words, sort of play along and be nice and engaging. Eventually, that breaks down, and they have to share their own opinion, right? So, if everybody, let's just say you got a group of 5 people, one of them being the INFP, and the 4 others want to go get ice cream, and the INFP really doesn't want to go get ice cream. They want to go get bubble tea or something, something else, or coffee. But they'll use their FE to sort of play along until they get in the car or they get to the ice cream store, and then that FI starts coming out, and like, oh, I really wanted coffee, but I was just trying to be nice. So I don't know. I don't know if that is what the wounded INFP is. I honestly don't know what the wounded INFP is. Feel free to describe it. I was typed as INTP because I grew up having to explain facts to my parents who could never be reasoned by logic alone. Okay, here's something. Okay. To me, that sounds more INTJ than INTP, and I'll tell you why. And I'm probably going to do another full video on this because it's another little idea that's been bouncing around in my head. But it's interesting that you brought this up. So the INTP isn't, when I compare TI to TE, TE to me is sort of I think of it as or it can be, not all the time, but it can manifest itself as aggressive rationality. They're aggressively logical or aggressively intellectual or rational. And it's just watch the typing videos on Talking with Famous People where somebody is an ENTJ or maybe an ESTJ, but definitely the ENTJs have this aggressive TE. It's very pushy. It's very I don't understand why other people don't see it the way I do. This is how it is. Do, right? INTPs and other sort of TI users, especially INTPs, are much more reserved and they second guess their logic a lot more because TI is constantly evaluating and checking itself, right? And it's trying to go through all the combinations and permutations of whatever it's analyzing and whatever sort of decision it's trying to make. And yes, you could get some very sort of quote unquote aggressive TI users, but it's because their TI is so good, it's so well established that whatever situation you gave them or problem you gave them to solve, their TI solved it immediately, and it's already come to the conclusion that it went through every combination, every permutation, and as long as the premises are true, this is the answer, right? So they could come across of it as aggressive, but it's different than the INTJs and the ENTJs do. They come across as and more just well, this is just it. This is just the way it's always done. This is just the anybody who does it, does this or thinks this about this differently is just dumb, right? And that's their FI coming out and trying to back up why they made whatever decision they made on a TE. So they're using their TE to sort of come to a decision or come to a conclusion, but in sort of a planning kind of way. But they use their FI to sort of validate it, right? Or to try to convince everybody that they're right. And so you get that aggressive TE kind of position where an INTP, I work with one very, very INTP, and he is the least aggressive person about what he's saying. Like, he's always leaving it. He'll always say, "This is what I think," and he's usually right. But he'll say, "Yeah," but he'll leave it open to interpretation, or there might be some situation where the conclusion that I made doesn't hold true, but it's a very rare circumstance, right? But they even really good TI users will acknowledge that whatever conclusion they came up with, it's assuming certain conditions are true, right? Or certain premises are the case. And so they're not nearly as aggressive about it, because they do realize that there could be situations where they're not right, and it's kind of the way that people always kind of talk about science, and how science is really just the best explanation we have at the time, but you have to be open to being wrong, right? And having somebody come in and reevaluate the situation, blah, 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 blah. So to the extent that you had sort of interactions with others, like your parents or something, where like you're sort of aggressively trying to get them, or like assertively trying to get them to see your rationale, that seems much more FITE, like an INTJ or an ENTJ, than it does INTP to me. But what do I know? I was typed as INTP. The science, yes. And also, just your comment about I find being nice is not a common trait amongst humans. That to me, that comes across as very FI, and and as I'm sure that would mean you have the FITE axis. But let's see here. Been burned too many times. Nothing to read into that. Yeah, that's fine. But that's an FI. That's an FI kind of thing. FE users, again, like I was saying, I don't know, 20 minutes ago, we don't really like to express how we feel about things unless really pushed on it. I generally think positive of strangers. Okay, that's good. Okay, so more to come on that TE thing, because it just sort of stood out to me on a couple of typing videos, and then some other channels that I've seen. Just the marked difference between TI users and TE users. Okay, I'm going to take a break. I might come back, talk about some other stuff. I hope everybody's doing well out there, and talk to you later. Bye.